Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to share with you as a means to introduce this topic and this dialogue with brands about millennials and their mental health. Where it started was from the insighting done by Synergy, given the surveys conducted by YouGov. So there are two sets of surveys conducted by YouGov. One is a combination of two studies mainly called Consumer Monitor Tracker and Economic Recovery Monitor. So the CMT and the ERM were studies conducted across 25 markets globally, spanning 5 continents: North America, South America, Europe, Australia, and Asia, which included the Philippines. It was an 8-week tracking study to check disruptions in consumer behavior and perceived economic impact in each country as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Metrics tracked included consumer sentiments, their intent to shop, shopping behavior, economic outlook, among others. And the aim is to provide relevant insights to businesses as they do their planning in the midst of these uncertainties. In terms of coverage, the total samples for the Philippines across the 8-week period was around 8,171. So that's nationwide. They are from the 18-year-olds and above, representing the online population. Out of these samples, the millennials, who are 24 to 39-year-olds, comprised 4,042. So the insights that I will be sharing with you today are primarily based on YouGov's various global public and private data sources in the CMT and the ERM, which were made available during this pandemic. And then the second major study is called the Global Behavior Tracker on COVID-19, done by the Imperial College of London in partnership with YouGov. This study was launched on the first week of April and is done every 2 weeks across 29 countries, which also includes the Philippines. And as we speak right now, this is continuously being tracked. This study represents the public's attitudes and health behaviors and how different populations are responding to the pandemic. Some of the metrics covered are compliance to safety measures and a range of other relevant behaviors from hygiene to quality of life, including this indicator for psychological distress. So for the presentation today, we looked into the July snapshot. Without further ado, here is the result of the ICL, or Imperial College of London, collaboration with YouGov. So this is a result of the self-evaluation of those surveyed in this piece of study. And respondents were asked to provide their self-evaluation based on the 4-patient health questionnaire, 4-point question in the patient health questionnaire. So it's a 4-item assessment test used to check for anxiety and depression levels. This test was developed and validated by Krenke, Spitzer, Williams, and Lowe. And this was based on their 2009 study. Notably, there are other assessments available. By no means that this is the only assessment. We are just presenting to you one of the many assessments that can be used. And this particular framework was utilized in the ICL study with YouGov. So based on the scales provided and across all 4 questions on overall, almost 7 in 10 of Filipino millennials are showing mild to severe symptoms or signs of anxiety and depression recently. And this, the 69%, is much higher compared to the 64% represented in the population. Stepping back, even prior to the pandemic, we are probably aware that millennials are already touted as one of the most anxious generation, according to studies from the American Psychiatric Association and Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. So let's try to find out what causes this anxiety, distress level, especially now that we are in the middle of this pandemic. One of the possible reasons that we saw is that of their extent of exposure on news and information about the pandemic. Much as general news content kept millennials informed on the COVID-19 situation, not so optimistic updates, possibly forecasts, may have also added to the anxiety that they are experiencing. More than 7 in 10 have increased consumption of general news, as you would see here, 72% nga. It is highest across the different content types. There are significantly more millennials with increased consumption than the total online population. Now, more than 6 in 10 of the millennials said that the COVID-19 situation in the country is getting worse, higher than the sentiments of the total online Philippine population. Such sentiments translate into heightened worries, not just about themselves, but on the health of their friends and families, especially those possibly who are of high risk. Notably, they are less worried about contracting COVID themselves as against their fears or worries for their friends and families. Probably it's about the ability to cope in terms of how to take care of their family members in case their family member contracts COVID. So, in other words, health concerns, not just for self, but more pronounced for their loved ones, is one anxiety inducing factor that we saw. Current experienced and anticipated economic impact of the pandemic also adds to this list of worries. Almost 6 in 10 are expecting global and economic recession in the near future, which we are already experiencing in the Philippines. And this translates into less secure finances and employment for millennials, and in turn, will affect their household spending capabilities and budget. Regular spending or bills and ability to pay rent have now become a major concern, more pronounced among the millennials. Steady cash flow may have been disrupted by the job loss or pause in business activities as a result of the community quarantine. Possible increased spending to amp up preventive measures, such as the purchase of cleaning materials, hygiene products, face masks, etc. And stocking up behavior may have also disrupted cash flow in the household. As millennials cope with all of these economic pressures, the millennials possibly still need to contend with coping with work and other roles, worsened, and this is worsened by the isolation that they're feeling, the social isolation, plus the mounting health and financial worries. Much as the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't been easy for all of us, not just millennials, but for all of us, millennials are in a particular precarious situation. And this was the most telling insight of it all. At this point, uh, probably generations like my generation and possibly the other panelists today, unlike our generation, this generation or this cohort are at the stage in life wherein they are still making major life decisions, or probably, as we call it, they're at an adulting stage. Prior to COVID-19, they are probably in the middle of making or planning for investments, major purchases, such as probably their first car, their first home, or preparing for major life events, such as potentially getting married, raising a young family, or probably moving abroad. So with the COVID-19 situation, all of these uh, have been paused or scrapped altogether, therefore affecting their lives moving forward. So there probably are a lot of questions in their minds, and they're worried about all of those. So it seems that millennials' plans, dreams, and aspirations got derailed by the pandemic. Such big plans, which potentially have been well thought out and possibly prepared for months or even years prior to the pandemic, are now either paused or possibly halted altogether. This may have disoriented some, if not most of them, especially for those that are working on these plans for a long time already. Now, we took a look at the working millennials and the student millennials, and intuitively speaking, obviously, for student millennials, completing their degrees are the ones that they are planning for, that potentially were put on hold or forcibly revamped in this case. So that also means that their questions would be on when they can potentially land their first dream job. So that has been affected by this pandemic. So there, what do all of these tell us? So millennials are going through some tough times, worse than the other age groups or cohorts. They are more anxious about how COVID-19 pandemic has affected not only them, but their loved ones as well, in terms of health, security, financial security, lifestyle changes. They are still our customers though, with needs. They need support now more than ever, despite the disruptions in cash flow and amidst the uncertainties. They have needs, and brands can find ways to extend either support or ways to ease their anxieties. They have upcoming major life events that have been postponed. As we always mention in this e-panel webinar series, those brands who stayed with their customers during these tough times will be remembered. Those who build meaningful brands, build meaning to their customers' lives will be remembered. Our product or service may not be the top priority for this segment to spend on, but as we build loyalty and support now, we could be their top of mind brands as they recalibrate or map out again their future plans as they attempt to move forward despite the current situation. So there you have it. This is just a glimpse of what this generation is experiencing now. As we move forward to discuss this more in this session, we will hope to be able to find a silver lining and think of how brands can be made more meaningful to this cohort, potentially alleviating their anxieties and worries brought about by the current pandemic situation. So this ends the introduction. Allow me to pass on the session to our next speaker.